Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Harborne Islamic Study Circle HISC Seerah session 130. So alhamdulillah, we finished with the Battle of Ditch and Banu Quraidah last time, and inshallah a few other instances we're going to tackle with. The next big issue is the ifk against Aisha radiallahu anha, and there are a couple of related incidents to that we'll need to go through before we get to that. Also, just apologising, you might get some background noise on the mic because there's I think there's a millah going on just down the road in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but a different background noise to the normal chirping of the birds and the quails that we used to get. But just recapping quickly on last week's session, which was the third one on Banu Quraidah, and we talked about how Sa'd ibn Mu'adh was made the decision maker, the arbiter, finally what would happen to Banu Quraidah after their treachery, and in accordance with the views of Allah and even the biblical norms for the Jewish tribes. The verdict was that all the men should be executed, women and children, properties taken as captive and distributed. But the main point that we talked about was the fact that the judgment was not because of who Banu Quraidah were, it's because of what they did. So there's no sense of anti-Semitism in Islam, and Islam has been very strong on rooting out all these prejudices, and the important thing is your belief. And those people that became Muslim, they were treated fine. Nothing was said of their ethnicity, their race, their heritage, right? They're Muslims, and that's the most important thing. So there's the idea of prejudice and discrimination on the basis of these things like skin color, nationalism, race. That is not allowed in Islam. Banu Quraidah were punished for the actions of treason and plotting against the state and actively, essentially, going to war against the Muslims at their most critical time in the Battle of the Ditch. We talked about the death of Sa'd bin Mu'adh, and then he was buried, and then the dua of the Prophet ﷺ and the grave squeezing Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, and then we sort of went back to the issue where the Prophet ﷺ had said at the beginning of the siege of Banu Quraidah, basically, do not pray Asr until you get to Banu Quraidah, and that highlighted a really important principle in fiqh, which allows valid differences of scholarly opinion based on the best interpretation of Islamic texts. Ikhtilaf. He didn't criticize either of the two groups. One group stayed and prayed Asr before they got to Banu Quraidah. The other group took the literal understanding and did not pray Asr, even though the time had elapsed, until they got to Banu Quraidah. There were these two interpretations. Only one is probably the more correct one that hits the mark in legal terms, and so the concept of least amount of doubt is a fiqh principle. Once it's done by, as we've said, qualified scholars, mujtahids, who do ijtihad, striving to get the best Islamic opinion. But you have this tension between the literal textual meaning, superficial, and the deeper meanings or implied meanings in the text, or taking into account other aspects that are related to that topic. And then we talked about some technical things around Islamic jurisprudence, around the different legislative sources of law, not just the Qur'an or the Hadith, or the Sunnah, but Ijma and Qiyas and other things. And again, we just finish it off by saying that, nowadays, even in their days, but nowadays, in particular, in many countries in the world, and certainly in Western countries, you get people going shopping for fatwas, because they want a justification to allow them to carry on doing the things that they do or they want to do, and they prefer to just blame the scholar, not really knowing that they will also take the blame for their choices, which is to choose that opinion on the basis of their desires or what's most convenient or easy for them, rather than what is the strongest opinion. So again, are we really sure what we are doing is what we are doing to the best of our ability, the way Allah wants us to do it, to the least amount of doubt. So we talked about all of those things. Moving then on to the next big thing, is the Ghazwah of Banu Mustaliq, also known as Al-Muraisi, right? And Banu Mustaliq is obviously the name of the tribe, whose leader is Al-Harith bin Dirar. So Banu Mustaliq, but their camp, or their tribe, is near the well of Muraisi. So again, and that's near where the Muslims camped before the battle. So the knowledges of the battles in the Seerah of the Prophet ﷺ use both terms, Banu Mustaliq and Muraisi, to refer to this Ghazwa, because the Prophet ﷺ, he went out with them, as opposed to Seerah, where the Prophet ﷺ dispatches people. There's a difference of opinion again in the books of Seerah as to when Banu Mustaliq happened. Did it happen immediately after Banu Nadir, or did it happen after Khandaq, or even some other time? Some scholars put it at another time. But the source text that I'm using places Banu Mustaliq after the Battle of the Ditch. As I say, other people, they put it after Banu Nadir and before the Battle of the Ditch. And there's a couple of hadith which are both groups used to justify the opinion, and they can't really both be true. But so, because one relies on the fact that Sa'd ibn Mu'adh was alive and said something important, the other one relies on the fact that Zainab is mentioned in the issues after Banu Mustaliq, because what happened, the battle in itself is fairly inconsequential, but on the way back there's a lot of rumours, especially initiated by the hypocrites, Abdullah ibn Ubay, who came out with them, and we'll talk about that later, inshallah. And then related to that is the whole slander against the mother of the believers, Aisha, with an incident that happened with the necklace, and Aisha coming in late. So that issue of the ifq, the slander, is related upon the return from the battle, hence it's important. And again, there are differences of opinion when this happened. Again, related to that, another incident that happened during the Battle of the Ditch, the Battle of the Trench, is that the Prophet he'd had instructed beforehand his cousin Zainab bint Jash to marry Zayd and his previously adopted son. And then Zayd had said to the Prophet ﷺ, this was during the Battle of the Ditch, these conversations, that Zayd was basically saying to the Prophet ﷺ, it's not working out for various reasons. Zayd and Zainab couldn't see eye to eye, partly because of their backgrounds and ability, and the son of a slave, and so or become a slave in the house of the Prophet ﷺ, although Zayd was originally from the other tribe. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he is in the hadith, he didn't want to deal with the divorce at that time during the issue around the Ahzab, because he was aware that the other people, like the hypocrites, would make a big deal out of this, and that would demoralize some of the Muslims, and it would give strength to the hypocrites, the pagan worshippers, the enemies of Islam, and the Jewish tribes. Banu Buraidah, that we talked about, would make a big deal out of this, and it would be a big propaganda coup for them, and the Prophet didn't want to deal with that during the battle, obviously. So, he urged Zayd not to divorce her at that time because, as I say, it wasn't the best time for it. So, a few things going on in the background, and the issue then is that following the battle, news reached the Prophet that the leader of Banu Mustaliq, Abi Dirar, he wanted to launch an attack against Muslims, and we talked before about how that this would then be a defensive war. But the Prophet had mentioned after the Battle of the Ditch and said, "Look, enough is enough. No more defensiveness. We are now going to go on the offensive," which was perfectly understandable. And again, this preemptive action could be taken as part of that new strategy, but it also could be taken as being defensive because he'd heard that Abu Dirar was thinking of launching an attack against the Muslims. So, but the Prophet, as always, needed to verify that information. He's not going to do this just on rumor and hearsay. So then he sent one of these sort of strong, tall, noteworthy sahabi called Buraidah bin Al-Haseeb Al-Aslami. He sent Buraidah to go and infiltrate the camp of Banu Mustaliq to find out, is this news true? Because if you're going to launch a war, you need to have good quality intel. So Buraidah, big, strapping, fearsome looking chap, he went to the camp of Mustaliq, which is, I think, a day or two south of Medina. So it's between Medina and Makkah, and it's the ideal staging point. And they had an alliance with Abdul Muttalib going back in the day, and so they felt their allegiance was with the Quraish rather than obviously the grandson of Abdul Muttalib, which is the Prophet but they had an alliance with the Quraish, and it said that they were aiding the Quraysh in the Battle of Uhud, and even possibly in the Battle of Ahzab, because they're located in a strategic point not far from Medina, and it's a safe place for the Quraysh to use as a base, unnoticed, for them to cause mischief and gain other intel. So Buraidah, he goes to Banu Mustaliq as just an individual, and he says basically he finds Al-Harith bin Dirar and says, I've heard that you're planning to launch an attack against the Muslims, and I want to join so I can get a share of the booty. So Buraidah, as I said, was a warrior type looking chap, fitted the bill. So there's nothing too untoward, just a single person. So Al-Harith said, yeah, that's true. You can join us. I could do with a person like you. And the Prophet told Buraidah obviously not to cause any problems. This wasn't a seek and destroy or decapitation mission. This was an intel mission. So so then Buraidah, during the night, he left, came back, and informed the Prophet the news is true. Then the Prophet sent out another sahabi to get. There was Abu Dirar. Al-Harith sent one of their spies as part of their mission to launch a war. They'd sent out spies to check out the strength and the position of the Muslims. One of these reconnoiter individuals from Al-Mustaliq was captured by the Muslims and killed. And so the Prophet knew that things were fairly imminent. So then he made plans fairly quickly to march to Banu Mustaliq, announced it, left Zayd bin Haritha, we talked about, to oversee oversee the affairs of Medina. So he was the proxy in charge, and the Prophet would do that every time he went. He gave the raya, the flag and the banner for the Muhajir to Abu Bakr, and then the Ansar were the banner was given to Sa'd ibn Ubadah, and we talked about the position of the two Sa'ds, and this was the other Sa'd ibn Ubadah, and then the armies then marched quickly until they got to Muraisi, and then they camped there, but it essentially taken the 700 Sahabi surprise attack against just a small tribe. This was the chances of outright success were very high in this. Given it's a surprise attack, they know that their enemy, they're heavily equipped, and so because the likelihood of success, obviously success comes from Allah, but for the hypocrites, that this was a quick win, as it were. The Battle of Uhud, Battle of the Trench, this was very difficult for them. There was a chance that for them, they felt that the odds were against them, so they didn't take part of those. But this is the other way round. The Muslims have the upper hand, and the chances are that it's going to be a quick win. Therefore, the hypocrites decided to join this Ghazwah, which is important because, again, there were some incidents that happened during the Ghazwah and coming back from the Ghazwah. So Abdullah ibn Ubay tried to cause dissension amongst the Muslims in the battle. A fight broke out essentially as they were coming back. And the fact that then the Prophet he did the quick march, and the army was tired, and then because of that, when they left early in the morning, Aisha was left back, and that caused the ifk. And we've talked previously about the role of Abdullah ibn Ubay, but his calculus was, let's join this battle. So amongst the Muslims on this battle was a small but sizable contingent of the hypocrites. Anyway, they all camped at Al-Muraisi, and it said that there was an exchange of arrows for an hour, also because the Banu Mustaliq were taken by surprise. And then the Muslims essentially charged and rushed the enemy, engaged the enemy, in quasi battle, but it ended up as a sort of a rout for the Muslims, complete victory. Only one Muslim was killed, and that was sort of friendly fire, accidentally by an Ansari, and that's important. We'll come on to that a bit later on. And about less than a dozen of the enemy were killed. As I say, they were just routed. They ran, scalped, and a lot of booty was taken. The women, the children, the sheep, the goats, whatever, was a lot of booty fell into the hands of the Muslims. So, as expected, it was a very one-sided affair. So, and the other thing about Banu Mustaliq is that they had that strategic position between Medina and not far from Medina and Makkah, and they were still idol worshippers. Their main god was Manat, and we've talked previously, certainly in the Meccan era, about the story of Manat and Al-Uzza, because these were alleged daughters of the Prophet ﷺ, and they were worshipped by the pagans, and Allah mentions this, gives reference to this in the Qur'an, where he talks about Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Manat as three of the idols. But their main idol was Al-Manat. And again, obviously, the Prophet ﷺ, demolished all of that. part of the booty, 2,000 camels, 5,000 sheep, 1,000 prisoners of war, mainly women and children. So again, it was straightforward victory. Another sort of side story related to that, we talked about one of the Muslims perishing in friendly fire. So an Ansar had mistaken Hishaam ibn Zubaba for an enemy and accidentally killed Hishaam. So Hishaam, he had a brother, and this was the only Muslim who died. So Hishaam had a brother, Miqyas ibn Zubaba. So Miqyas, obviously everyone knows about the rules of blood money, etc. Miqyas, he pretended to convert to Islam so he could collect the blood money. So that's what he did. After the battle, Miqyas came to the brothers and said, "I am the brother of Hishaam who died. Give me my right." So the Prophet gave him the blood money, 100 camels. So again, really significant, wealth. So Miqyas then took the 100 camels, and then that night, Miqyas then killed the Ansari Sahabi who had accidentally killed his brother Hishaam. So Miqyas killed Miqyas's killer that night, and then took the camels as well and fled back to Makkah, right? Because he knows he's going to be safe in Makkah, right? And so complete and utter treachery. I mean, this is just unfathomable. So pretends to be Muslim, collects the blood money, kills the person who killed his brother, so gets his sense of revenge, and then takes all the camels and flees to Makkah in the dead of night. So Miqyas is it's important because he's one of those people, one of those 4 men and 2 women, I think, who in the conquest of Makkah, so this is fast forwarding a few years, in the conquest of Makkah, he was on the blacklist. Prophet had announced before the conquest, there are these 4 or 5 people and 2 women. If you find them, you catch them and you kill them, dead or alive. Kill them, even if they are hanging onto the cloth of the Kaaba. My judgment is they should be executed there and then. There's no clemency. These people are on. These are persona non grata. They have done, really, and all of them had a backstory. This was the backstory, Miqyas's backstory, that he'd pretended, got the blood money, killed a Muslim, and then fled. Right? But again, we'll talk about this inshallah in many months' time. Of those people, actually half they weren't given amnesty because it was a general non-amnesty. It was a death list, but for various reasons, people interceded, etc., and half of them were actually let off. Okay. The other story which is related to this, which I'll do quickly before we go on to the other issues, and we'll finish early hopefully because of that, is the story of Juwairiyah. Now Juwairiyah, she was the daughter of the chief of Banu Mustaliq, Al-Harith, and she was amongst the booty that was captured. So again, how things were allocated. She was then part of the booty. The spoils was distributed, and then she was given as spoil to Thabit. And again, Juwairiyah, as we know, Juwairiyah bint Al-Harith, she became the wife of the Prophet. But this is the story, and again, it's a lovely story. So, as being a slave, and Islam, it has a very different relationship or view of slavery. It's not, when we talk about slavery in our day and age, we think back to the really extreme forms of slavery that we see against the captures that were taken from the African countries. Some of them Muslims, some of them even the traders were Muslims in Africa, were taken over to the Caribbean, the Americas, North and South, and worked on the plantations, etc. And taken from being free people, captured, sold as slaves, and then working on these plantations. And there are a lot of films like 12 Years a Slave, etc., where and lots of biographies, where we've seen the utter dehumanization of slaves. They are not considered essentially as human beings, and are often taken as being lesser to even the animals and other property of these slave owners. I mean, that is completely abominable to any notion of those things in Islam. Islam has a very different concept of slavery. I mean, we are, as Muslims, we aspire to be slaves of Allah, right? So you're not going to sort of completely outlaw slavery, because our relationship should be one of slavery towards Allah. That's the abd relationship. But anyway, that's a very sort of side point. But what Islam did, it said that if there is slavery, and Islam survives without slavery, but if you do have slavery, it needs to be tightly regulated in this way. And obviously, one of the greatest acts that a Muslim can do is to free a slave, and we've seen that throughout the Seerah and in the years after that. And again, you can't capture a free person and like highway robbery and banditry that happened to Salman al-Farsi, right? The only way someone can become a slave is through legal warfare and captured by the state and taken as spoils of war. Slaves can't be made in any other way. Okay, and then even in that situation, the slave has rights, lots of rights, and we shouldn't see it as a slave in the plantation sense, but more as a sort of indentured servant or a servant within the household that has these rights. And one of those rights is that, it's a long topic to talk about slavery, so I'll just briefly cover it. One of those rights is that they can, if they wish, they have the right to demand their freedom, and the slave owner has to enter into a contract in order to free them, and then they can whatever the agreement work off or pay off that agreement and obtain their freedom. So Juwairiyah, being the daughter of the chief of Banu Mustaliq, there's no way she will accept from her noble background to become a slave. She knows these rulings, so she immediately enters into an agreement with Thabit to purchase her own freedom. Right? And again, the Qur'an clearly states, as in translation, if your slaves want to purchase their freedom, then make a deal and negotiate with them. So the onus is there for us to be fair, not like the owners of Salman al-Farsi, who said, look, you've got to give me 100 fully grown date-producing palm trees, then I can free you. And so Juwairiyah, she's then going around all the other nobles, raising money for her freedom. And there's look, I'll pay you back once I'm free, because I'm the daughter of the chief, and my father, he ran away, but he's bound to come back with a ransom. I'll get the ransom, I'll pay you back, but I just want to be free, right? So she's going around, and obviously she comes to the Prophet ﷺ, knocks on the door, and she's there to ask for some help in whatever he can in terms of money, because he's the chief, to help with her purchasing his own freedom. And again, I just love the way Aisha radiallahu anha, she narrates a lot of these hadith, which put her, what we would say, in a negative light, but she's so honest about it, and it's incredibly empowering for how human everyone was, how real emotions they have, and how much we can trust these narrations as being valid and true. They're not hyped up. When you read autobiographies nowadays in the Western world, especially, they are sugar coated, and the revisionism will often paint the people so that they're writing about themselves in a very favourable light, right? And it's not always warts and all, because that's very difficult. But here, Aisha, she's saying it as it is, and there are lessons there for us, and that's the reason why she says it as it is. And she goes, as soon as Juwairiyah came in, Aisha saw that she was sweet and she was beautiful, right? And she said, look, no one saw Juwairiyah, and she's probably in her late teens, except that she would be captivated by her beauty. So she came knocking on the door of the Prophet ﷺ's house, Aisha was, to ask for money, and Aisha narrates from the heart, as soon as I saw her, I had something, negative towards her, right? Because I knew my husband, I knew the Prophet ﷺ would see in her what I am seeing, right? So as soon as Juwairiyah entered, Aisha had this sort of visceral reaction, and it's just a human reaction. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. This was just how it was. She's recording that for us, for our benefit. And again, she understands who the Prophet ﷺ was. She's been living with him. She knows what he is like. And she goes, as soon as she entered, Juwairiyah, she comes in. She's the daughter of a nobleman. So she carries herself as a daughter of a nobleman, obviously. So she goes, I am the princess of my tribe, right? Daughter of the nobleman. I've arranged to free myself, so please help me in this matter. So forthright, this is what I want, and has that confidence about her. And obviously the Prophet ﷺ was taken by that confidence. The fact that she was the daughter of the chief of the tribe. And again, he's thinking 3-4 steps ahead. So as a way of getting the tribe onto his side, right? And what better way than to marry the daughter of the chief, right? So he's thinking politically, but also obviously he's a man and he sees her beauty, and she says that, she knows her husband, and he will see in her what I see in her. So the Prophet ﷺ, obviously he could give her what she wanted in terms of money, gold, or whatever to help her. So the Prophet ﷺ, with all that calculus going on, says, well, what if I was to give you something better, right? And so Juwairiyah goes, well, what could be better than my own freedom, right? I will free you myself. So I will pay your ransom, and I will marry you, right? And my mahar, because you have to in marriage, the husband has to give a marriage gift to the wife, right? And he goes, as my gift, my mahar to you, I will free you, right? So that's a win-win-win situation, right? What if I give you something better? I'll marry you, and as part of the marriage contract, my gift to you will be your freedom, right? So Juwairiyah obviously accepts that, right? And again, being from Banu Mustaliq, they know what Medina is like, they know of the character of the Prophet ﷺ, and this was almost a no-brainer for her. So then the marriage happened, obviously. Then and again the wonderful thing there is, again, it shows the genuine nature of the Prophet ﷺ. We don't. Here he is. He's not trying to be superhuman, and aloof from everyone. He's a normal human being. He eats, he drinks, he sleeps. He does all the things all other human beings do, and he is affected by human desires and emotions, like all people are. And again, we'll talk about this in terms of the ifk, the jealousy, the envy, the mistrust that happens for no good reason, but it's normal human emotion. And here he sees someone, and Aisha knows, so like, I know my husband, he'll see in what I see in her, and so that's perfectly acceptable. So so the news had spread that the Prophet ﷺ had offered to marry Juwairiyah, right? So all the other people who'd been given the women and children as part of the booty. They say, look, how can we have the in-laws of the Prophet ﷺ as our slaves? This is just not acceptable, right? So because of that one offer, one by one, as a sort of domino effect, all of the slaves that were captured and enslaved were freed. Subhanallah, right? So all of the people that were captured in Banu Mustaliq, they were all freed because of that one offer. Then later on, when Harith came to Medina, knowing that his whole tribe is gone, but he needs to have his family back, he wants to ransom his daughter, comes back with all the money, comes back, demands the Prophet ﷺ, and asks for his daughter back. I've got whatever ransom it is, I'm the chief, I want her back. So the Prophet ﷺ, he turned to Juwairiyah and said, look, it's her decision, right? If she wants, she can go back, right? So, and again here, the fiqh issue is that the husband can give the right to the wife, and it's stipulated for a period of time, but in fiqh terms, but the husband can give the decision to divorce. He can let the wife decide, right? Doesn't have to, but he can. The permission is there because the Prophet ﷺ gave the option to Juwairiyah to divorce him or not, and he'll accept that, right? So he said it's up to her. Whatever she decides, I'll stick by that. And this is the nature of the Prophet ﷺ. I married her, she agreed, but if she wants to go back, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. Okay? And then they'll obviously have to go through the legal requirements of the divorce, but the decision to divorce is up to her. But then she decided, obviously, having been around the Prophet ﷺ and being in Medina and seeing Islam, to stay a Muslim and stay with the Prophet ﷺ. And then Al-Harith, as being the chief of the tribe, was just blown away by this. He couldn't see how, as a captive, to become married and then decide to stay there. He just couldn't accept it. And this was his own daughter, the pride of his eyes. So this really blew his mind. So then he talked to his daughter and found out what Islam was about. He then decided to become a Muslim, right? From planning to attack the Muslims and defeat them, to actually then, now that his daughter was Muslim, even though his whole tribe was taken, and just think as a chief, how much that really gets to you. But as a chief, then deciding to adopt the way of your conquerors, he then said, fine, I'll become a Muslim. So then Al-Harith became a Muslim, and just a few weeks back, they were worshipping Al-Manat. He now becomes a Muslim. And then the whole tribe who were captive and then freed because they're the in-laws of the Prophet ﷺ, they all said, well, our chief has become a Muslim, and they're living in Medina, they're seeing the fruits of Islam. They all then become Muslim. So that one offer, Prophet ﷺ, to marry Juwairiyah, for whatever reason, the whole tribe now becomes Muslim. So now that the whole tribe becomes Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ then reappoints, listen to this, reappoints Al-Harith as chief of the tribe, gives him back all the wealth that they'd taken. The sheep, the camels, 2,000 sheep, 2,000 camels, 5,000 sheep, etc. And they go back to where they lived. So basically, the pre-battle status quo is as it was, apart from two facts. One is Juwairiyah is now the wife of the Prophet ﷺ. She is al-Mu'mineen, and everyone else is a Muslim. And they are now, they're back to where they were. They learned about Islam, they've embraced Islam again. It just shows the beauty of Islam, and it shows why jihad is done, what is the purpose of these things, is to bring people to Islam. And then Aisha comments later on, and so we'll finish here, that look, I don't know of any lady who has brought more blessings to her tribe other than Juwairiyah, right? This one lady, by seeking her freedom, buying her freedom, she married the Prophet ﷺ, that one act, and then the whole tribe became Muslim and were returned back to where they were from being slaves. back to their own household, and they've even more importantly than all the wealth, they've all become Muslim, and inshallah they will all get to paradise, right? So that one act, and Prophet, he could think these steps ahead, right? And again, we'll talk some other time inshallah about the status of Juwairiyah as a wife of the Prophet. She was known for her piety, her fasting, and not just her beauty, but her reputation is beyond all the other the people. She has earned that high status for a reason, right? She used to fast regularly, do dhikr regularly, etc., etc. But we'll inshallah we'll talk about this later on, inshallah. So a lot of lessons there in terms of how the battles are done, the slaves, the concept of slavery, buying your own freedom, regulating slavery, and the humanity of the Prophet ﷺ. He is a normal human being, and the honesty of people like Aisha in narrating these accounts. So beautiful stories, related to Banu Mustaliq, Al-Muraisi. We haven't talked about the actual battle, other than it only lasted for an hour or so, but then there are things which happened within the battle. Abdullah ibn Ubay, inshallah, we'll talk about later. There's a lot of noise going on here. I'll finish there, inshallah. So do remember me, du'as, pray for the Ummah as well. Inshallah, catch up next week, hopefully when things are a bit quieter. So do take care of yourself. Do remember to say in your du'as. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاك الله خير everybody. Assalamu alaikum.